Hello everyone and welcome to my English YouTube channel. Now, I already have a YouTube channel, but that channel is in Italian and you can find it under my name Leonardo Damiano. Now I want to try to make a full English channel in which I can talk about computer science, programming, and in particular cybersecurity, because those are my passion and those are the things that I want to share with everyone. Now, to start off the content on my English YouTube channel, I want to bring my OSCP experience, and in particular I want to bring an OSCP guide, which I've developed in this month since I obtained the OSCP certification. Now, I obtained the OSCP certification on the 20th August 2023, and I've written a blog post on my technical blog, which is, you can find it at blog.leonardodamiano.xyz. In this blog post, I go over all the content and all the tips that I can think of with respect to passing OSCP, and in particular, I focus on the material that OSCP is trying to teach you. So in this blog post, you can find anything. I break down the discussion into 3 different parts. The first part is about prerequisites, which is what is it that OSCP assumes you already know to start taking and studying for this certification. Then the main content of the blog post is about the material, in which I describe the core subject taught by the OSCP certification. And finally, I talk about expectations, which is what is it that OSCP wants you to know at the end, and in particular, the skills you will be tested on during the final exam. Because everyone knows to obtain the OSCP certification, you have to go through an exam. So, having set hopefully the right expectations, we can start off with the content of this video, in which I will describe my experience studying for OSCP and my exam experience. With respect to the lab information, I bought the 3 months plan, so only 3 months of preparation for OSCP. Now, why I did that? I did that because prior to taking these months, I already had some experience with penetration testing and CTS in general. So like I would say I had 2 to 3 years of prior experience. This is because in my bachelor year at university in Rome at Tor Vergata, I had followed a course which introduced the topics of penetration testing, platforms like Hack-the-Box, TroyAcme and things like that. So on and off, I've been doing this thing for like 2-3 years. And it means that I was already experienced with Linux, with web exploitation, with web penetration testing, and the only things that I really needed to learn were Windows and Active Directory and a few other things. And this in 3 months is pretty good. I suggest that if you have no idea about penetration testing, you don't go for the OSCP, but you go for another kind of like practice. You just start to practice around, because it's just much better to get your hands dirty immediately as soon as possible, so that you have this trauma of everything being hard, being difficult, because that's the way it works in cybersecurity. And then you can start getting used to the difficulty and you can move on. Now, with respect to the actual material of the course, the material is divided into 3 main parts. The first 2 is the modules and the exercises. Now, funnily enough, this is not how I started. Why? Because I started with the challenge labs. Now, what are these challenge labs? These challenge labs are environment in which you have a series of computers connected into a network, and your objective is to compromise all those machines, all the machines in the network. And to compromise those machines, sometimes the machines are connected and sometimes they are independent target. So depending on the case, you might have to hack first into a machine and then into another, or you can just hack into different machines without any sort of like correlation between them in a way. So why did I start with the challenge labs? Because practice is key in the field of cybersecurity. I started with the first challenge lab, which is called MedTech, and it took me 20 days to complete it. It's a bit of a long time, but this is because I was not playing on it and practicing on it every day, all day, which meant that it took me a little bit. This is because the first lab was probably the hardest. I would say that the first 2 labs were probably the hardest, because by doing the labs and by getting stuck in the labs, I was going back and I was reading the modules and the exercise to understand what I was required to do. And if you get stuck in the challenge labs, I also highly suggest to go into the Discord community once you get your access lab, because in Discord there are a lot of people which will help you when you get stuck, and I suggest to do it. So like the challenge labs essentially put you in a situation, in an exam-like situation. Now, there are two types of challenge labs. The first type are those of MedTech, Relia, and Skylark. And this type of challenge labs are like full of machines. So there are many machines. There are about 10 to 20 machines for each lab, and they get progressively difficult, which means that MedTech is the easiest, then there is Relia, and then finally there is Skylark. And Skylark is the only challenge lab that I didn't completely finish because I was already due time, since I was finishing my lab time essentially. But what I suggest to do is at least MedTech and Relia complete those challenge labs for sure. And this is the first type. So the first type teaches you the main commands, the main exploitation techniques, the main enumeration techniques. It's all up to you, of course, because there's no guide. It's literally like a CTF machine that you will find in ActiveBox, TryAcme, Proving Grounds. It's all up to you to solve those labs. But I suggest you start with that. Then the second type of challenge labs are actually the most useful. Why? Because they resemble a perfect exam situation. Now, as I said, in the first type of challenge labs, typically you have between 10 to 20 machines. In the second type of challenge labs, which is the type of OSCP A, B, and C, you only have 6 targets. This is exactly the situation you will find in the final exam. Now, those 6 targets are actually divided into 3 groups, which is 3 Active Directory machine, so like Windows, and 3 independent targets, which can be either Windows or Linux. Now, I suggest you definitely have to do all of those 3 scenarios, all of those 3 challenge labs, because by doing that, you will understand the structure of the final exam. Of course, the machine for the final exam will be different from those you find in the challenge labs, but still, knowing the structure, for example, knowing the structure of the Active Directory, in the exam, you will not find something extremely different. So focus on that and be comfortable with doing it. Also, one last thing I suggest with respect to the challenge labs is you should save either the last or the last 2 challenge labs to perform a complete simulation of the exam. In terms also of time and energy management. Why? Because in the final exam, you will have 23 hours and 43 minutes to finish everything. This means that time becomes an enemy. It's probably the biggest enemy and the biggest resources you have to start learn how to manage. Time and energy, which are of course strictly linked. So like for example, what I did was for the OSCP, I split and I did one time only the AD portion from start to finish and one time the 3 independent targets from start to finish. Then I went into holidays, and then when I came back, I did the OSCP-C, and the OSCP-C I tried to do it all in a row. I went to sleep because I didn't manage to finish in time, but the morning of the next day I finished the last machine that I needed. This practice is really important, as I said, because one of the most difficult things with respect to OSCP is not even necessarily the technical things you need to do to like finish the single machines. It's a different thing rather. It's the fact that after a few machines, after 2-3 machines, after the Active Directory set, you will find yourself pretty exhausted. So you should really learn how to manage your energy so that you can quickly finish through all of the stuff without wasting energy. And now this brings us to the exam timeline. So to the timeline that it took for my particular exam. So with respect to my exam, I started the exam at 2 p.m. because I sleep in late, it was August, so I was like, let's start in a time where I have a lot of energy. So like I woke up around 1 p.m. and I prepared myself and I started at 2. Now, the first 15 minutes are used to set up the connection with the proctoring setup, because this exam is proctored, meaning that the proctors will see you and your screen through webcam and through screen sharing throughout the entire duration of the exam. And this is of course to avoid anti-cheating. Personally, I've been pretty satisfied with the proctors I found because they were very professional. They understood when I needed to go. You just write, look, sorry, I need to go a little bit, and they say, look, sure, don't worry. So it's pretty simple, and you quickly forget about their existence, essentially. Because once you set everything up and it works with screen sharing and webcam, you can just focus on the exam and they will not bother you. And this is very, very important. So the proctoring is a little bit weird at first, especially if you never done it, if you never did it, but I actually forgot about it pretty quickly. So the first target I started with was the Active Directory, and I liked the time that I did because it only took me 2 hours and 11 minutes, and I also took things very slowly. So every time I found something, I went back to my notes, I edited my notes, I signed every command, I took the screenshot, so I was pretty slow and methodical. And this is something I highly suggest everyone to do, because even if you quickly do a target, but you forget how you did it, then it's no point, because the next day you have to write a full report. So this is really important. After this, I took a little bit of break because I was really in time. Initially, I was like, okay, it's okay if I take 4 to 5 hours to do the Active Directory, but then it took me 2 hours and 11 minutes. So I was really good in time, and I was like, okay, I can take a break of around 20 minutes, which is what I did, just to cool off and to rest. This is also really important, to let the brain rest, otherwise you will get tired too quickly. And then I started the first independent target, which I finished after like 1 hour and 20 minutes. So even this was good timing. Now at this point I was pretty satisfied. Why? Because since I gotten the 10 extra points, which I probably didn't mention, but essentially when I did the exercise, I did 80% of all exercise for each modules. So essentially for each module you have a bunch of exercise. Now if for each module you do at least 80% of the exercise, you get 10 bonus points for the exam. So these are bonus points. These bonus points are really, really important because they give you more freedom in the final exam. Now, to pass the final exam, you need 70 points. The Active Directory gives you 40 points. One independent target gives you 20 points, which is the root flag plus the user flag. So it's like 10 points to get a shell and 10 points to get a root shell. At this point, so I had 60 points, but I also had the 10 bonus points, so that gave me 70 points. So essentially by 6, I was already passing. However, I also suggest this, even if you have enough points, if you feel enough energy to keep moving, do it, because the more points you get, the better, so that even if you make some mistake in the report, even if you make some mistake which like invalidates the point you have for one machine, you can go back and take the points from other machines. This is why, even though I was pretty good with respect to the bonus points, I kept going and I went to the second independent target after some rest. And also notice one thing, that when I started the second target, it was about 6:40, while I finished the first target at 5:55. This means that I take a pretty good rest with respect to the finish of target 1 and the start of target 2. This is because I had enough points to pass, so I wanted to relax myself in order to save the energy for finishing the last 2 machines. Because there is no rush, I had enough time, I just needed to calm down and be focused. So the second target, I was actually stuck with the second target. So I played it around for 1 hour and 20 minutes and I got nothing, not even a user flag. This was very frustrating because I was pretty close to a user flag, but I couldn't get it. So it meant no points. Then I went to eat dinner, and I came back at around 9:13. I started the third target and I finished it in 1 hour and 15-20 minutes. So as you can see, for all my targets, I took roughly 1 hour and 30 to 2 hours. Just the second target took me longer. Now, after I did this, I took another rest and I started to try to tackle the second target once again at 11:30. Now, this story is funny because at that point I stayed up until 4 in the morning, 4 a.m., and I still couldn't finish the second target. It was only later, the day after, while writing the report, that I understood finally what I had missed the day before. It was a funny story. This taught me that fundamentally, while I got back to the machine, I was having bias with respect to my previous attempt. So like I had some ideas about the machine, I had some ideas about like rabbit holes and roads that didn't work, but I missed a crucial detail, and this crucial detail I did not understand it even later on, even when I kept going with the machine after. Because instead of reviewing my notes and instead of starting from scratch the machine, I kept going based on the assumption that I made before. And this I later realized was a big mistake. However, with respect to the exam itself, it was only a single machine which I didn't do, so I had enough points to pass. At this point I had 80 points plus 10, so that's like 90 points. That was way enough to pass. And then after 4 a.m. I was like, okay, I need to start to write the report. So the report timeline is as follows. I start to write the report at about 4:15 and I finish the first draft at 6:50. At this point, I'm extremely tired, so I go to sleep. And while I was doing this, I learned that even though I had taken extremely precise notes about every step I just took and about every screenshot I needed to take, so like I had everything, still, writing the report can be painful because you have to connect the dots, you have to write a lot, and it was not easy. So I suggest this is why you need to take good notes before, and this is why you don't need actually to do as I did, to waste too much time on targets that you do not need to pass the exam. Because I was like exhausting myself, but I didn't need to. So like at this point, I start to write the first template of the report. I had done no prior report writing. This is probably why it took me much longer. I mean, I was used to writing small reports for like ActiveBox machines, like write-ups, sort of like that. But I had not in particular practice about OSCP report writing, which is why probably it took me this long. I was not used to it, so I had to learn and it took me much longer. So like the next day, I wake up at 1. Why I wake up at 1? I wake up at 1 because I still had access to the VPN of the exam for 1 hour more, for like 45 minutes actually. And I used those 45 minutes to make sure that I had everything took, like every screenshot, every comment, I had everything for each machine. This is very critical in the exam because if you miss something, then you're good. Even if you did a machine, but you miss a screenshot, then it doesn't work for the final report and you don't pass. So be extremely careful about that, be extremely methodical. At that point, I kept writing the report until essentially 4. I eat lunch at that point, and 1 hour later, I started at 5 and I finished at 10:30. So as you can see, it took me a lot of time to write the report. And this, I think, it's because the way I wrote the report was also to try to make a story about all the vulnerabilities that I found, to try to connect the dots, to try to explain why something was a vulnerability, even to try to understand exactly where the vulnerability were in the process. Because when you do the activity itself of a penetration test, you are just executing commands and getting results, maybe getting privileges, getting code execution, and that's it. But then when you need to write a report, you need to understand, okay, but exactly where were the vulnerabilities in this case? What was the misconfiguration? What was the vulnerability that allowed me to get code execution and things of the sort? And to write those things out and to give them proper form is still a hard work that requires time. At that moment, I was pretty satisfied with the job with the report, which I still am to this day. I think it's a pretty good report. And I sent the report at 10:30. I was pretty satisfied, and the next day I had my answer. I had passed the certification. Now, to finish off this video, I will give some tips. These tips are pretty general. In the future videos, I will enter into more technical detail about the content itself to help you prepare for the certification. So in terms of tips, I would say the tip number 1, which can appear to be obvious, but is still something that I myself had to learn, is to invest lots and lots of time. Now, when I was taking this certification, I was also working, and so like typically I did not spend too much time on it. But then as days went by, I was like, I'm not preparing myself enough for this certification. I need to prepare much more. I need to spend much more time. And so in the month of August, while I had a break from work, I spent a lot of time doing the challenge labs, the exercise and everything else. Also in the end of July as well. Now, the second tip is to pay a lot of attention to course material. Now, OSCP has seen various revisions with respect to course material. From my personal experience, taking the 2023 version, which was recently updated, I can say that with respect to the exam content that I found, everything was detailed in the course material. Like every technique was detailed in the course material. Maybe not necessarily every command, but the general idea was taught there, and then to bridge the gap with respect to what I found, a simple Google search did the rest. So you have to pay a lot of attention, you have to understand exactly what it is that they are teaching. And of course, for this, you can also like read cheat sheet about OSCP. You can read my cheat sheet, for example, in which I showcase all the type of attacks and techniques that, of course, they are not all the attacks and techniques in terms of penetration testing, but they are the attacks and techniques that were mentioned during the course, and therefore the one that you need to do OSCP. Now, of course, the third tip is also obvious, it's just to practice a lot. And this goes back to the investing a lot of time, because practice takes time. But there are no magic ways in this kind of field, in this kind of job. You just have to practice. You just have to practice so much so that you nail your methodology really well. You need to have a good, strong methodology. And while you do the practice, you don't need just to do the machine and that's it. You need to document what you need. You need to understand the steps you took, and you need to write somewhere the commands you use in a cheat sheet. You have to prepare your own cheat sheet. You don't need to use cheat sheet made by other people, like the one I made for myself. The key idea is you can take inspiration from others people's cheat sheet, but then at the end of the day, you need to prepare your own, because while you prepare your own cheat sheet, you're also studying for the certification. The act of writing a cheat sheet is essentially studying and preparing yourself for the certification. If you find confident in your cheat sheet, then you will probably most likely pass the exam. Once again, be methodical, take note of everything. Now, I say this, but I myself sometimes am lazy and I forget things. So like all of these tips, they seem a bit boring, they seem obvious, but at the end of the day, that's the issue. Like those are the issues. Typically, people either don't invest a lot of time, or they are like lazy and they don't take note of everything, or they don't prepare well the cheat sheet, they don't practice enough. Like those are all the things that you really need to do well. And even if you're not methodical all the time, while you prepare your cheat sheet, while you do the practice for the exam, try to be more methodical than you typically are. Try to develop your own methodology with respect to how you approach uncertainty, because that's what you have to do. At the end of the day, you have to approach the uncertainty of the exam. Remember every command and every output that let you move forward, so this has to do more with the exam. Once you're starting the exam, let's say that you find something that brings you forward one step into the machine. The moment you find it, I suggest you take down the command, you copy the command you use, you copy the output you receive somewhere in your notes, you take a screenshot and you give proper names to the screenshot files so that you can quickly recognize them, you order them. And doing this becomes extremely important with respect to the final report. Because at the end of the day, that's what you need to do. You need to write a report. And to write a report, you need to remember the commands, the tools you use, the output you receive, and the walkthrough of steps you took for the exam. One other tip is this is an exam. Now, the world of penetration testing is extremely big, and all the knowledge that you need to become a perfect penetration tester is extremely high. It's like impossible to nail it down into a single exam. Which means, since OSCP is a specific exam, understand what the exam is testing you on. To give a concrete example, antivirus evasion. Now, antivirus evasion in the world of research and of real activities such as penetration tests and red teaming, antivirus evasion is really crucial and important. You cannot do a PT if you don't know anything about antivirus evasion, if you don't obfuscate your payloads. Well, in OSCP, you are not being tested on antivirus evasions, which means you can forget about obfuscation because you don't need it. Is it important? Of course it's important in the real world, but OSCP, after all, aims to be a foundational certification, an entry-level certification. It's really hard, but it's still entry-level. There are other certifications like OSCP that test you on antivirus evasion, so understand what you're being tested on. And this will be a topic of a future video where I talk about expectations of the exam. Finally, obvious, prepare, 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 and prepare. Everything comes down to preparation. And of course, preparation is really hard to nail down. Everyone is not prepared fully, but you need to prepare yourself good enough so that you can tackle the uncertainty left by the exam. I think that OSCP is definitely something that everyone can do. It just comes down to investing a lot of time, paying a lot of attention to the course material and studying the course material, studying it really, really well, doing a lot of practice, preparing your own cheat sheet, and while preparing it, developing your own methodology and taking note of every useful command that you might encounter, and also to understand, okay, when I find this situation, when I find this service, when I find this configuration, this is what I need to do to escalate my privilege or to get code execution or things like that. And in general, when you do the exam, you also have to understand what you are being tested on this specific exam, which in this case is OSCP. And by studying well the material, you also learn what you're being tested on, because at the end of the day, you will be tested on the official material presented by the course, at least from my personal experience. If you have a different experience, please write down in the comment that I'm interested to hear about it. And so this has been my first video. I hope it was interesting. In the future video, as I said, I will go into technical depth of these various topics, and I hope it's interesting for you as well. If you have any suggestion on the material you would like to see, or maybe some doubts regarding OSCP preparation, feel free to write to me, subscribe, and share the videos, because they will help me to grow on this channel. And that's it. I hope it was enjoyable, and to the next video.